Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you may be joining us. I just wanted to welcome you back to Off the Record, the Real Talk podcast. I'm your host, Allie Braswell. Glad to be joining you here to share and talk through what are some powerful nuggets I hope that you'll take away from this conversations and be able to employ in your life, whether it be in your work life, your personal life, that make you an incredible leader, that help you prepare by being a person in the room when the off the record conversations take place. You know, when we came up with this concept back in June of last year, June 2025, it was how do we host the conversations that you wish you were a fly on the wall or that you could get access to people to hear what they're thinking about that will help make you a better leader, that will then help to move you forward in your career and to help you lead people with a people first attitude. You know, we began in June talking about pivots in life and how those pivots may actually help you move forward in achieving what you really are purposed to do. You know, it had the incredible Nicholas Smith. Let me pause and say congratulations to Nicholas on your nomination for an NAACP Image Award. So powerful to have the artivist Nicholas Smith on here as he talked about several of the books and the illustrations that he's done. Now, Nicholas began his career as a Disney Imagineer, having graduated from Hampton University as an architect, but he would go on to pivot after something he did that was really powerful on Sundays, his Sunday morning sketches. That actually pivoted and allowed him to move into what he really is doing now as the artivist, Nicholas Smith, who you've seen his work. And right now, his work, some of his work is nominated on a global stage. He's the illustrator behind Sinners. He was also the illustrator behind Wakanda Forever and has published several books that have been New York Times bestsellers. We had that type of talent out here talking about when you look at things and you're moving in a particular direction, that it may require you to move in another direction in order to be able to achieve the happiness and the goals that you have set out for yourself and to achieve your purpose. Nicholas, had, you could say, had the dream job as a Disney Imagineer, but pivoted to his passion and really went after it and has thus become a world renowned artist, excuse me, New York Times best-selling artist that is published many books. He is the illustrator behind several things when he illustrated the book around the uh, Olympics when we had our five young gymnasts win gold in gymnastics down in South America. He's the artist and the storyteller behind the incredible books that he's put out on the New York Times bestsellers list. So, you know, just wanted to give him a shout out because I love it when I can see people who I've had an opportunity to spend a moment in their lives to be maybe a guiding light or to be a someone who promotes and helps them move towards their desired passions. It was great to have Nicholas on the show and just wanted to shout him out. And stay tuned, folks, because Sinners is nominated for Academy Awards, and the person who did the illustrations behind that was Nicholas, who pivoted from the dream job of being a Disney Imagineer and this incredible into this incredible artist that's out there making and changing lives through the people that he reaches through his great work. So, huge shout out to you, Nicholas. Keep doing great things. As we begin season 4, I just wanted to say that this season is called the Leadership in Real Time. You know, if you've listened to the podcast before, you know something about how we approach leadership here. And it's that we approach about it and talk about it when everything is not just polished and tidy, but we talk about it when it's in motion. We talk about when it's changing. We talk about leadership when it's happening, how it's happening each and every day. And when decisions are heavy and when the information is sometimes skewed or incomplete, and people are looking to you for direction as that leader, we take the time out to say, you know, how do we do that? So let me ask you a question. Really simple question. What do you do when the plan you believed in suddenly stops working? What do you do? How do you handle it? What are your go-to strategies for getting through that? That's what we want to talk about here today is when the plan changes. When the plan changes, how do you handle it? How do you navigate through it? How do you make a difference? Not for just 6 months from now, not after the consultants arrive on site to tell you what you may already know, but how do you handle it right now? Because, see, I believe that every leader eventually will face that moment in their career when the strategy that they once made perfect sense suddenly no longer fits the moment. Has that ever happened to you? And when that moment arrived, how did you handle it? Did leadership becomes very real in that moment because your teams, your organizations, your committees are looking to you for answers, right? So let's take a time and break it down here for a moment. I truly believe that most plans are created with good intent and that leaders gather the data to develop their team strategy and then organizations aligned around that strategy and that shared direction. But sometimes things come along, and the truth says that experienced leaders will eventually learn that plans rarely fail because the leaders are careless. They fail sometimes because things change, conditions change faster than the expectations. When you take time to think about it and walk through it, it's like we're moving in a direction, we're getting things done, but all of a sudden there's a change, and then there is the need to adapt to it quickly, right? And a lot of times organizations are kind of stuck. Markets may shift, technology evolves, and key people may move on from the organization. And across industries, we've seen it happen again and again on how companies that have dominated their sectors suddenly face disruption. Let me give you a real example. For more than a century, Kodak was one of the most recognizable companies in the world. Their business model was simple and incredibly successful. They sell cameras, they sell film, they sell the processing of said film, and they produce incredible memories. But when the digital photography emerged, even though Kodak helped to invent it, they were a bit inflexible and they struggled to make the pivot. The key thing is it's difficult to abandon some of the ways that we do things, but when innovation happens, it means nothing without availability or adaptability. When you take a time to look at it and you think about it, Kodak was a part of the change of bringing in digital photography and digital work, but they had a issue with making the change and adapting to that innovation. And eventually, unfortunately, just recently, Kodak filed for bankruptcy protection after more than 130 years in business. Now, you had to understand that means a lot to me because I grew up in Rochester, New York, where the headquarters was, and every corner, it seemed to me, had a Kodak processing facility or some type of Kodak business unit in my neighborhood at the end of the street that I grew up on, or over in other parts of the community. You always ran into Eastman Kodak Company. But not only were they some of the ones who were the help to invent the process, but Polaroid was another organization that went through similar inability to adapt to the innovation, and it meant nothing if innovation comes along and the organization doesn't have the flexibility to adapt to the change, and we end up hearing stories like Kodak. So this is more than just a business story. It really is talking to you that it's a leadership lesson. When the plan that once worked begins to close or lose relevance, do we protect the plan or do we adapt to the moment? And what I would like to suggest is that we have to make the move to adapting to the moment. We have to be able to maintain that flexibility as leaders to be able to help coach the teams and understand how we begin to continue to move towards the goal while we modify the plan. I hope that makes sense and it's clear to everyone. And that, when we adapt to the moment, the first thing is that test of leadership is when the plan changes, something interesting happens inside the organizations, right? People start looking around the room and they start looking for who's in charge. And eventually they start looking at that leader. And when they're looking at that leader, not because the leader caused the disruption or the change, but because that leader carries responsibility for the response. And I'd like to believe that there's really three incredible ways to deal with that. And teams instinctively look for these three signals. And here they are. First, composure. People want to know that the leader is steady. They want to know that even though this is a blow to what we had originally planned to do, that the leader is feeling confident in their ability to be able to handle this and help lead the team through this challenge. People want that steadiness in that leader. The next thing is clarity. Even if every detail is not known yet, people want direction. They want to know, how are we going to get to a solution now that this challenge, this disruption in what we had planned has now occurred? How do we navigate through it? And the last is they're really looking for the confidence, not arrogance and definitely not denial, but they're looking for the confidence that says, we will figure this out and we'll figure it out together. And we're going to get to the end, and the expectation of what we were asked to deliver, we will deliver it. We're just going to take a different route to get there. People don't expect leaders to have every answer, but what they do expect is for us to have those three things: the confidence to say that we're going to do it, and also remain calm through the heat of the battle to be able to lead us forward. But do they expect leaders to show up with steadiness? They expect us to come and be and demonstrate the steadiness, the confidence, and that when we do that, that confidence spreads through our organizations and helps us to make a difference and helps us to lead through when the plan changes. When you think about that, the momentum returns and the team begins to move forward. And as they begin to move forward, they come up with how they're going to navigate through this incredible challenge and be able to stay on task and be able to be successful, because ultimately they look to the leader to give them the resources to be able to do that. So when the plan changes, what should leaders do? Here are the three nuggets I'm sharing here. So let me share these that help you move in real time. First, acknowledge the reality quickly. Acknowledge the reality quickly. Silence creates confusion. I don't know if you've ever been around, but when there's silence, there will be a false narrative offered up by someone, a supposition of what they believe is happening or where they believe things went wrong. So the first thing that a great leader can do is immediately acknowledge the reality that something has happened and we need to get in front of it. We need to frame it. We really need to know what we're talking about. So it's acknowledge the reality and remove the silence so that we don't allow confusion to move into our projects, into our endeavors that we're plugging away. The first thing I'd like to see is when strong leaders really step up and say, this situation has shifted, it's changed, but let's talk about what that means in terms of what do we need to do next? How do we assess where we are? How do we come up with a plan or a solution to move past the challenge that may have presented itself that kind of caused the plan to get off the plan, the path that we laid out? And then how do we reframe that path? That's the next step. So acknowledge it and then be able to move forward and then begin to reframe the path forward. So when I look at that, what I want you to walk away from that is being transparent and a little bit vulnerable goes a long way into helping the organization build trust in the leader and build trust in that they're on the right path and that we're going to get the work done no matter what. It's just that we're going to do it a little differently, going to take a different approach. So how do you begin moving down that path? And that's where what I call it, reframing the path. How do you begin to move towards reframing the path? Even when the strategy must change, the mission stays the same. So leaders remind the team of why the work matters. You go back in and you talk about the scope of the work and what it's going to bring about in terms of accomplishing it and the benefits that are going to come out of the work being completed. Even though we may have a delay or even a derailment, we get back on the path by, number one, acknowledging it, being transparent about the impact that it may have, but then again, re-stressing to the organization where the change may lead us towards being able to fulfill this and how we're going to come about it, and really collectively asking them to contribute to what the new solution looks like. Leaders will remind the team why the work matters and how the path forward may need to evolve. The third is to really re-engage the team. Kind of spoke about it there. It's not about the leader carrying the burden alone. It's about a shared interest. It's about sharing and asking for input from your team to come up with what are ways that we can work around the challenge that may have been presented. It's about aligning people to move forward together and not finger point. One of the greatest things I've always heard, if there's a finger pointing at you, there's three pointing back towards you. And so you begin to ask some questions of your team and bring them together and say, what are we seeing here? What do we see happening in our environment? What really has this change or this disruption caused? And how do we begin to mitigate the silence and the story that may be being told? Number two, then how do we begin to move forward? And that's a great question to ask, is what adjustments do we need to make in order to be able to overcome the challenge that's presented itself? What do we need to do differently? How do we think outside of the box to come up with a solution? And then lastly, the question that most leaders should ask is, how do we move forward together? How do we make this happen in real time and make sure that we come together and begin to work towards a common goal? Let me share a moment from my own leadership journey where this was actually reality. During my time working in leadership at Disney, planning was always a big part of how we operated. We would have numerous meetings that laid out what the objective was and then what the plan of action would be, down to where we brought in different leaders from different sections that would interact and make up this complex team to be able to go out and deliver a solution. I remember we studied the data, we mapped out our strategy, and we aligned the team around a clear plan. And when we did that, we had where we thought we were going. But in this case, shortly after launching this one initiative we spent weeks preparing for, we realized something wasn't working the way we expected it. This was around a communications change where we were moving from 800 megahertz radios into Nextel push-to-talk cellular systems. And this was affecting everything in the operations to day-to-day communications, putting in the network that would allow us to be able to maintain communications and have the failover in the event that on-site communications were hampered by a storm or were impeded by some type of circumstance that made it impossible to communicate. And what we found is that we had gaps in our coverage based upon where we were placing towers and how it was getting through a lot of the concrete that were the buildings that we had. And we wanted to also make sure that nothing that we did would impede guest behavior than what we had anticipated. People would become so reliant upon cell phones, and I'll date myself back in 2010, that, they wanted to be able to have that no matter where they were in our parks or resorts. So how could we roll out not only for our operations side and communications of making the magic, but also for our guests who had an expectation of being able to use their cell phone everywhere. Now, the thing that kind of disrupted the plan that we cleanly laid out was the fact that gaps in coverage were affecting us in our resort side, as well as within our operations side. And what we needed to do was face the operational realities and the challenges, and then begin to map out what we hadn't accounted for. And suddenly the plan that we built, that we so carefully did with the results, were not hitting the results we intended. So I'll be honest with you, we had to continue to map through it. My first instinct was to try to make sure that the portion that our team was responsible for stayed true to the original plan of work. And what I had to realize is that just as everyone else was adapting, we all had to adapt. Even though we had invested so much effort into building out the plan, it really required us to be aware. And that's a golden nugget right there. Leadership requires awareness in order to be able to understand how to keep the team morale up and be able to continue to move forward. So I gathered the team and we sat and we talked through it and said that the plan we built for the best plan was the best plan that we had in the time that we built it. But as the environment is telling us something different, we need to adjust. And that is what happened next. That was so powerful is that when we made the adjustment, instead of losing confidence, the team leaned in and came up with solutions. And this is where I would first learn about something called a cow. Now, many of you are thinking about the cow that produces milk and produce and beef, but what I'm talking about is a unit called a cell on wheels, which very much looks like a short mini microbus on four big wheels. And a cellular tower on wheels was actually brought in to help fill some of the operational gaps while we remapped the strategy of where we would place towers in order to improve cellular signals across property. The other things is we put in antennas throughout the hotels that would also help to strengthen the signals within the environment of our guest resorts. And by doing that, and the team coming up with those, they shared their observations. New ideas surfaced and new technology that we had maybe decided to roll out a year later had to move up and roll out sooner in order to maintain that. But had we not created an environment where they felt comfortable that leadership wasn't judging, leadership wasn't trying to just force through a plan that had been approved, but that we were open enough to come together and use their voices and their ideas to help bring about a solution, it made us stronger and it helped us to create a stronger path forward. We eventually delivered that. We delivered it shortly after the timeline, but we delivered it with the integrity that is required in order to maintain safety, to have great, robust communications and redundancy, and also meet guest satisfaction. And I would tell you just my observation is that leadership isn't about proving the original plan was perfect. For me, it taught me that leadership is about recognizing when the moment requires a new approach and having the courage to lead the adjustment. And that is the key, is that when you look at it, it really brings us down to leadership isn't about defending the plan. It's about leading through the adjustment. It's helping people understand how to navigate through the challenges they may face, and then being vulnerable enough to say that, yes, this is what we planned and what we approved or what I believe we should have done, but circumstances showed us that we needed to improve it and move forward. And, you know, the great thing about it is that's a great example of when the plan changes, it's really the leader's responsibility to think about and manage through, because leadership rarely waits for perfect conditions. It usually happens in real time. And when it does, it's the plan that was until reality showed up. And when reality shows up, we must learn how to navigate and help people win through the adjustment. You know, as I think about this and as I bring this to a close for this episode, I really want you to walk away and understand that plans change, conditions shift, circumstances evolve, but leadership is revealed in how we as leaders respond to the challenge that we face and how well, when that moment demands of us, how well we help our teams manage through something different. You know, the whole key here is when plans change, maintain your composure, maintain your calmness. There's always going to be a solution. We just have to think about it and think through it together and come up with the clearest path forward that allows us to make the difference. And that's what season 4 of Off the Record is about. It's about the moments when the decisions leaders make while situations are still unfolding. I think about my time in the Marine Corps as we were navigating through different things and we had expectations of one opportunity, and then only to get there and find out that that's not the opportunity that it presented at all. And that we had to come up then with a plan that allowed us to be able to support the strategic commanders in the field by adapting and learning how to gather the information from a different method than what we had intended. it truly was leveraging innovation and then also making sure that we plugged in adaptability to be able to adjust to the environment that we faced. The key things for leaders that I would like you to take away is that the adjustments leaders must make before every answer is available is truly the courage it takes to lead forward anyway. When we take on that role of being a leader, if you're leading right now in your organization, your community, or your teams, this season is going to be for you because we're going to go deep into understanding what does it mean when leadership is really moving forward and what does it mean to lead in real time. I hope this brings you a certain level of understanding that it's okay because leadership rarely waits for those perfect conditions. And I hope you know that it happens in real time and that this episode will help you manage and plan for those changes and help you to be able to overcome it no matter the challenge, no matter the circumstance, no matter the disruption. To be a leader and stay calm, collected, confident in your ability and your team, and then manage the adjustment through the change. If it happens in real time, then we know that we'll be able to handle it going forward. I want to thank you for joining me again as we open this new season of which is leadership in real time. I'll see you next Wednesday at 6 p.m. because if it's 6 o'clock on a Wednesday, it's time for Off the Record, the Real Talk podcast with Allie Braswell. Thanks for joining me. Look forward to talking with you next Wednesday.